Welcome back to more HOA stories from Reddit. In today's Ripe Stories video, when I inherited a fully paid off home at 25, I thought I hit the jackpot. But instead, a power-hungry HOA president banned me from my street and tried to force me out of the neighborhood. He thought I was helpless, but he had no idea who he was actually messing with. Let's dive right into the video. And the first homeowner association story is titled, HOA fined me for being too young and banned me from their 62+ neighborhood. So for context, I am a 25-year-old woman and last year my great uncle passed away at the age of 87. He was an amazing guy, super witty and completely independent up until his final months. He did not have any kids of his own, and throughout my college years I used to drive out to his place every single weekend to help him with some yard work, grocery shopping, or just to hang out and watch baseball. So we were really close, and when his estate was settled, I found out that he had left me his house outright. It was a beautiful, fully paid off 3-bedroom house located in a quiet, gated community in Florida. The neighborhood was designated as a senior community, and in their rules it was marked as a 62+ and older neighborhood. Now, I was renting a tiny, cramped 1-bedroom apartment with a landlord who raised my rent every 6 months like clockwork. Inheriting a house with zero mortgage was basically a life-changing miracle for me. My plan was pretty simple: move into the house, save up my salary for a couple years, figure out my long-term future, and eventually decide whether to keep it or sell it. I knew it was a senior community, but I assumed that as long as I kept my head down, maintained the lawn, didn't throw loud parties, and acted like a polite neighbor, nobody would care. I am a homebody anyway. My idea of a wild night is reading a book on the porch with my dog and going to bed by 10. Sadly, I was completely mistaken. The very day the movers dropped off my furniture, I was in the front yard unloading a few stray boxes from my trunk. That was when I heard the low, rattling hum of a golf cart speeding down the street. And what can I say? It pulled up right at the edge of my driveway. Sitting in the driver's seat was a man in his late 60s wearing a fancy polo shirt. This was Joe. Joe was the president of the Homeowner Association board, and as I would soon discover, Joe ran this neighborhood like a prison, with him being the warden. Joe parked the golf cart, stepped out and strutted towards me with his hands on his hips. He looked at my boxes, looked at me and frowned. "Can I help you?" Joe asked. His tone was immediately hostile. "Visitors are supposed to park in the overflow lot if you're staying longer than 3 hours." "Who are you visiting?" I wiped my hands on my jeans and gave him a friendly smile. "Oh, hi. Actually, I'm not visiting. I'm moving in. This was my great uncle's place." Joe froze. He squinted at me like I just told him I was moving a circus into the living room. "Moving in? You cannot move in here. This is a 62+ community. Children are not allowed to live here." I'm 25, I said, chuckling a bit because I thought he was joking or just confused. I'm definitely not a child. I inherited the property and the deed was transferred into my name last week. Joe's face turned bright red. "I don't care whose name is on the deed. The community covenants clearly state that every residence must be occupied by someone 62 years of age or older. You do not meet the minimum age requirements. You cannot reside here. You need to pack this stuff back up." I was stunned, and I said, "Sir, I own this house free and clear. I have every legal right to live in my own home." "Well, we will see about that," Joe snapped, and he aggressively put his golf cart into reverse, slammed on the gas, and then sped away down the cul-de-sac. At the time I thought Joe was just a cranky old guy throwing a brief tantrum, and I figured once he checked with the HOA attorney or read basic property laws, he would just realize that you cannot kick an owner out of their own deeded real estate. And 2 days later, I found a paper at my front door. It was an announcement for an emergency special meeting of the HOA Board of Directors, and the topic listed on the agenda was resolution regarding unauthorized occupancy and age restriction violations at property address. They were literally holding an emergency community meeting specifically to deal with the threat of a 25-year-old existing in their neighborhood. Well, I decided to attend the meeting, and I wanted to be civil and explain my situation and show everyone that I was not gonna cause any trouble. The meeting was held at the community clubhouse, and when I walked in there were about 30 elderly residents sitting in folding chairs. Some of them looked curious, but Joe was standing at the front podium like he was preparing for war. As soon as the meeting started, Joe took the microphone and started launching into a dramatic rant. "Members of the community," Joe announced into the microphone, "we face a serious challenge to the integrity and peace of our neighborhood. An unauthorized individual has taken up residence in the house formerly owned by our late member. This individual is 25 years old. If we allow young people to live here, our quiet sanctuary will be ruined. We will have wild music, late-night partying, speeding cars, and our property values will plummet. We must enforce our charter." I raised my hand, stood up, and waited for him to acknowledge me. "Joe, with all due respect, I'm one person. I work full-time from home in computer graphics, I don't party, I don't speed, and I inherited this home from my family. I'm legally allowed to occupy my own property." An older woman sitting in the second row stood up and looked at Joe. "Joe, honestly, she's been completely quiet since she moved in. My husband and I spoke to her yesterday, and she was very sweet. Is this really necessary?" Joe slammed his hand onto the podium. "Rules are rules!" And by the way, guys, I just noticed my noise-canceling microphone is simply too strong. Slamming my hand on the table does nothing. Anyway, he said, "If we make an exception for one kid, before you know it, this whole street will turn into a college dorm. The board has reviewed the age restrictions, and we are taking a vote tonight." The board consisted of Joe and 4 of his close friends who lived on the street, and without even opening the floor for a proper discussion, Joe called for the vote and all 5 board members raised their hands. "The vote passes 5-0, Joe declared triumphantly. "The unauthorized resident has 30 days to vacate the premises. If the resident fails to vacate, daily fines will commence, and legal action to secure a community ban will be initiated." I couldn't believe what I was hearing here. They had literally just voted to banish me from my own home because of my age. I went home that night quite furious, but I decided to stand my ground. I was not gonna let a power-hungry dictator in a golf cart intimidate me out of my inheritance. So then 30 days passed and naturally I didn't move. That was when the real harassment started though. On day 31, I checked my mailbox, and inside was a formal violation notice from the HOA. They had assessed a fine of $500 against me for illegal occupancy by underage individual, and attached was a note stating that a $500 fine would be added every single day I remained in the house. A week later, the total fines had reached $3,500, but Joe was not done yet. Another day, when I got to the front entrance gate of the neighborhood, my electronic transponder badge did not work. Basically, the gate stayed closed. I rolled down my window and talked to the security guard in the booth, a nice guy who looked extremely embarrassed. "I'm so sorry," the guard whispered to me. "Joe came by this morning and personally ordered us to revoke your gate pass. He said, you're officially banned from the neighborhood grounds." "Banned?" I asked, my voice rising in disbelief. "I live here. I own the house at the end of the block. How am I supposed to drive to my home?" Joe told us that if you try to drive through the visitor lane, we have to treat you as a trespasser and call the police, the guard said, shaking his head. He also said your car will be towed if it's parked anywhere on community roads. So then I had to park my car in a shopping center lot half a mile away, walk through the pedestrian gate, and walk all the way to my house in the heat. When I got to my driveway, I saw Joe sitting in his golf cart across the street watching me with a smug, proud look on his face. So then that afternoon I received a certified letter in the mail. It was a formal demand letter sent by the HOA's legal counsel. The letter stated that I was officially banned from all common areas, roads and facilities within the HOA community. It demanded that I surrender my keys, clear out my belongings and transfer ownership of the home, or rent it out to an eligible senior within 60 days, or face an immediate judicial eviction and foreclosure lawsuit for the unpaid daily fines, which were now growing by $500 every 24 hours. Well, that was the moment they crossed the line from annoying to illegal. I immediately picked up my phone and started calling specialized real estate attorneys in my city, and I found a lawyer who specialized in HOA litigation and Fair Housing Act violations. By the way, that has to be a killer job in Florida. Anyway, so when I sat down in my attorney's office the next morning, I handed over the whole stack of documents, the fine notices, the letter banning me from the roads, the revoking of my gate pass, and the formal legal demand letter from the HOA lawyer. My attorney read through the documents. "Let me get this completely straight," my attorney said, laying the papers on his desk. "They fine you $500 a day for living in a home that you own outright?" "Yeah," I said. "And they revoked your gate access and issued a formal ban prohibiting you from using the community roads to reach your own deeded property?" "Yep, I had to walk half a mile today." He then explained the law to me in plain English. Under the Federal Housing for Older Persons Act, senior communities are granted specific exemptions from age discrimination laws to operate as 55+ or 62+ housing. However, those exemptions do not allow an HOA to deny a person their constitutional property rights, nor does it allow them to physically ban an owner from accessing their deeded home. Furthermore, assessing $500 a day infinitely was flagrantly illegal. On top of that, by revoking my access to my home, fining me thousands of dollars unlawfully, threatening me with towing and attempting an illegal constructive eviction, Joe and the board had committed multiple massive violations of federal fair housing laws, state property laws, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. "What do you want me to do?" my attorney asked me. "I want them to pay for what they did," I said. "I try to be nice. I try to be a good neighbor. But they turned my life into a living nightmare." "Say no more," my attorney smiled. "We are not just gonna defend you, we are gonna counterattack." First, my attorney filed for an emergency injunction in state court to immediately restore my gate access, cancel all towing threats, and halt the illegal daily fines. The court order was granted, and soon after, Joe was forced by the court order to reactivate my transponder and reinstate my full access to the neighborhood. I will never forget driving through the front gate that afternoon, watching Joe stand near the clubhouse looking like he had just swallowed a lemon. But the emergency injunction was just the appetizer, really. The main course was coming next. My attorney spent the time building a massive civil lawsuit against the HOA, the individual board members, and Joe personally too. We sued them for Fair Housing Act discrimination, illegal restraint of property rights, civil harassment, tortious interference, and breach of fiduciary duties. We demanded $230,000 in actual compensatory and punitive damages. When the lawsuit was officially served to the HOA, the entire neighborhood exploded into chaos. See, Joe had never told the community members that his little crusade against me was blatantly illegal. He had led the residents to believe that he was just casually enforcing a routine rule. He certainly did not tell them that he was exposing the entire HOA to a ton of money in legal liability. A week after the lawsuit was served, the HOA's insurance carrier received a copy of the filing. The insurance company took one look at Joe's blatantly illegal actions, specifically revoking an owner's right to access their own home and levying thousands in unauthorized fines, and sent a formal letter to the HOA board. The insurance company stated that because the board had acted intentionally, maliciously, and completely outside the scope of their legal authority, the insurance policy might not cover the damages if the case went to trial. Translation: the homeowners themselves, along with the board members individually, were potentially gonna be on the hook for a $230,000 bill out of their own pockets. Panic swept through the neighborhood. Suddenly, the sweet older neighbors who had stayed silent during the emergency meeting realized that Joe's power trip was about to drain their emergency reserve funds and force a massive special assessment on every single house in the development. Then, a group of furious residents gathered signatures and called a real emergency meeting. This time, it was not a meeting to kick me out, it was a meeting to strip Joe of his power. I attended that meeting too, and the atmosphere in the clubhouse was entirely different now. Joe was sitting at the front table, but he didn't look like a proud dictator anymore. He looked pale, exhausted, and visibly terrified. Resident after resident stood up at the microphone and completely unleashed on Joe and the board. "Are you completely out of your mind, Joe?" one elderly man shouted from the third row. "You dragged this entire community into a federal discrimination lawsuit because you couldn't handle a young woman living on our street? Our property values are gonna tank," another neighbor yelled. "My insurance agent told me our HOA dues might double next year just to pay for your legal stupidity. You lied to us." Joe tried to defend himself. He grabbed the microphone, his hands trembling. "I was just trying to protect the age-restricted character of our neighborhood. I was trying to keep us safe." "She's 25 years old and works on a computer," a woman shouted back. "She's not a threat. You are a threat to this community." And that night, the community voted overwhelmingly to remove Joe and his entire board from their positions, effective immediately. A brand new sensible interim board was elected on the spot. A couple days later, the new HOA board and their newly hired legal counsel contacted my attorney begging for a settlement. They knew if this case went to a jury, they were gonna get completely destroyed. My attorney had compiled months of evidence, text messages Joe had sent to security logs proving my transponder was blocked, copies of the illegal fine notices, recorded video of Joe harassing me in my driveway, and the negotiation did not take long. The HOA's main insurance carrier, terrified of a massive jury verdict, agreed to step in and pay out the settlement to avoid a public trial. The final settlement terms were glorious. The HOA agreed to pay me a lump sum of $230,000 in cash for damages, emotional distress, and legal fees. Every single fine assessed against my account was completely wiped clean and expunged from their records. The HOA issued a formal written letter of apology signed by the new board, explicitly recognizing my full, unrestricted right to reside in my inherited home for as long as I wished. The board passed a permanent covenant amendment as well, clarifying that inherited property owners were fully exempt from age restrictions as long as they owned the title. When the settlement check was cleared and deposited into my bank account, I sat at my kitchen table and just stared at the number on my screen: $230,000. I ended up living in that house for another 3 months just to enjoy the peaceful silence and watch Joe suffer the consequences of his actions. Joe was completely disgraced, none of his neighbors would talk to him anymore, and whenever he drove his little golf cart down the street, people literally turned their backs on him or shook their heads. He went from being the undisputed king of the neighborhood to a complete social outcast. As for me though, I decided I did not really want to live around HOA politics for the rest of my 20s. I used a chunk of the $230,000 settlement along with the proceeds from selling my great-uncle's house to buy a beautiful single-family home out in the countryside. No HOA, no board meetings, no golf carts, no miserable old dictators telling me what I can or cannot do on my own land. And honestly, OP, selling the house and buying a rural single-family home with no HOA was just the smartest move you could have possibly made. I mean, imagine living in a neighborhood where like 30+ people know that your lawsuit gutted their community reserve means that you would probably be getting side eyes at the mailbox for the next decade. It would kind of be a weird atmosphere. But either way, guys, let me know in the comments, if you would have been in OP's shoes, would you have stayed in the neighborhood or would you have also moved away? Let me know what you would have done in the comments, and please don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And a comment from Reddit said, everyone sucks here, though obviously Joe and the board are 99% in the wrong here for breaking federal housing law and illegally blocking access to your property. But honestly, you knew before moving a single piece of furniture that this was a designated 62+ senior community. Your entire plan was literally, I know the rules say 62+, but I'm just gonna fly under the radar and hope that nobody notices me. That was super naive of you. You should have checked the deed covenants and spoken with a real estate attorney before moving in, not after the HOA president declared war on you. And another Reddit comment said, inheriting fee simple property means that you own the land, period. The board president literally committed constructive eviction, illegal restraint of property, and flagrantly violated the Fair Housing Act because his fragile ego could not stomach a young woman quietly reading on her porch. Joe pulled a classic dictator move here, lied to the entire neighborhood, and exposed every single homeowner to massive personal financial liability. And the next one is a fantastic malicious compliance story that you don't want to miss. It is titled Malicious Compliance on Entitled Influencers. Posted by user The Amazing Luke. So I run a small fitness consultancy business, and I have done for the past few years. Since setting up, I've largely relied on word of mouth for most of my business, so I typically don't have to deal with a lot of difficult clients. However, recently I had a run-in with a woman who has genuinely made my blood boil. This woman, well, let's just call her Giggy, or Jiggy, I would just say Giggy, for the sake of anonymity, sent me a DM a few weeks ago, and she said she was looking to lose weight and tighten up her physique for the summer. Gigi didn't really fit my usual client demographic, usually 30s, 40s. She was young, mid-20s, and boasted a decent follower count and seemed to be a local influencer of some description. This piqued my interest. I thought perhaps I could benefit from her connections to boost my business a bit. How wrong I was. The initial consultation over text was pretty standard. I asked her some details about her past exercise history, diet, and before getting to work on her meal/exercise plan. Then it moved to the matter of payment. I'd mentioned pretty early on that I typically charge $50 for my plans, but either she didn't read that or decided to feign willful ignorance, and when I reminded her of the price, she said, and I quote, "I was wondering whether you would be interested in getting yourself some exposure instead of payment." I hate to say it, but at the time, I was seriously thinking of taking her up on her offer. However, after talking to some of my friends, I snapped out of it, resolving to be firm with the price instead, which she accepted, albeit somewhat begrudgingly. Looking back on it now though, I'm kind of stunned that she genuinely expected me to give it to her for free, but I guess that's how the influencer economy works these days. The plan consisted of exercises and recipes mainly designed around helping her lose weight. Usually, I advise most of my clients to try and maintain light to moderate calorie deficits. Not only is this overall healthier, less muscle loss, and they tend to suck a lot less than dramatic calorie reductions, so are easier to maintain in the long run, and I explained all this to Gigi and said that she understood it meant progress wouldn't be immediate, and as such, I thought we were on the same page. Well, a week later, I woke up at 5 AM to an Instagram call from Gigi. I didn't even know you could call people on Instagram. Half awake, I picked up the phone and she screamed, "You're a ducking scammer! You think this crap's some kind of joke?" I was still in a daze, so I weakly asked her what was going on. "I just weighed in after a week on your BS plan and I'm up half a ducking pound." I asked her to slow down and breathe, which seemed to calm her down, albeit temporarily. I explained to her that we had been through this before, and that weight loss is not a linear process, and that scale measurements can be offset from anything from water weight, clothes, time of day, etc. "You're just covering your ass. Cut the BS right now." Oh well, I tried. I guess you cannot talk sense to an unstable influencer at 5 AM. "I've got a swimwear collaboration I need to shoot this week and you ducking lied to me. Your plan did not work." Influencer to English translation. I successfully got something for free and now I need to rip into you for something I didn't get for free. Bear in mind here, this girl is by no means overweight. Her BMI was already comfortably in the healthy range, but I guess an influencer's work is never done. On the verge of tears, she continued, "Do you know how screwed I am? I followed your plan to the ducking letter and look where ducking got me." Based on her tone and the time of the morning she called, she was definitely on the receiving end of 3 to 4 margaritas comfortably, which definitely was not in the plan, but I didn't feel like pointing out the obvious. An hour later she messaged again, still unhinged but slightly more coherent. "Refund me immediately. Also, post a public statement on your page admitting your plan doesn't work and that I was right to call you out. Do it by noon, or I start tagging every local gym and every brand that has ever worked with you." I sat with that for a minute, and then an idea came to my mind. I refunded the $50 within the hour and posted the following, word for word as requested on my business page. Public statement as requested by Gigi's handle. I refunded the client in full. My standard plan prioritizes sustainable, moderate deficits and long-term adherence rather than dramatic one-week scale drops. The client reported following the plan to the ducking letter and still gained 0.5 pounds in 7 days. So therefore, by the client's own stated metric and timeline, the plan did not produce the immediate results she required for her swimwear shoot. She was correct to actually call this out. For context, we both live in a small, tight-knit city where everyone knows each other, particularly in the business community, and I wanted to make sure any other potential brand collaborators knew who they were dealing with, so I left it at that. No extra commentary, no screenshots, no mention of the 5 AM call, the margaritas, and the original request for free work, or the fact that she was already in a healthy BMI range. Well, suffice to say, by lunch, the post had been screenshotted and circulated in a few local fitness groups, and people started asking the obvious questions under her posts. She tried to walk it back, saying, "He twisted my words," and then deleted her original rant and then went quiet. The collapse still happened, by the way, and from the photos that went up, the half-pound gain was invisible. My page, meanwhile, picked up a small but steady stream of new inquiries from people who specifically said they wanted the boring, sustainable version. I never heard from Gigi again. By the way, guys, something just came to my mind. I'm curious. Would you consider people like me who read stories on YouTube as influencers? Personally, I would never consider myself an influencer. I would think entertainer fits it better. I don't really want to influence anyone's opinion. I'm pretty much just here to play with the cats, show them to you, and entertain you with some stories. But obviously, the main focus are the cats. And the next one is a petty revenge story, which is titled, I Insist You Take the Last One, posted by user TightSteak232. So, for context, hubby and I went grocery shopping for our upcoming vacation, and we like to do spoiled since we only take this one in-state vacation every year, and we like a prime rib night, seafood night, baby back rib night, etc. Anyway, the local grocery store has an outstanding meat department. Generally, preceding holidays, they will have specials where the high-end meats are really marked down. This is when we normally would buy our prime rib. We were broke during the last holiday sale, 4th of July, so we missed it, and fortunately, they had another sale. The prime rib was marked $6 off per pound. Yay us! Anyway, we are on one end of the counter checking out the seafood because the employee is currently serving another customer, and he's wrapping up her last item. I wander over while he's helping her, and I notice there's only one prime rib left. It's not well trimmed at all and has almost no calotte, the cap part that tastes the best, but the price is right. I told my husband it was the last one, and the woman being helped happened to glance at what I was discussing, and the employee hands her the wrap package and turns to help me. "Excuse me," she points to the rib I saw and said, "Can you wrap that up for me as well?" I turn to her, bummed. "Seriously?" I ask. "I was here first," she insists, and she grimaces at me sarcastically. I go to the end and tell my hubby we will have to come up with plan B since they are out of rib. The other woman grabs her rib roast and grins again as she walks away. Mentally, both birds are flying, and I'm uttering hieroglyphics. The employee comes to me and said, "She never asked, but I have one more prime rib in the back. Would you like to see it?" "I will take it," sight unseen, and I nod, and he brings out a beautifully trimmed prime rib, probably a pound or so larger than the fatty one we lost, and it has an absolute massive calotte on it. He offered to take another $1 off her pound because it was larger than the one I didn't get, and it made our day. However, the thing that made it even better? We got in the checkout lane ahead of the rib heist lady, and my husband unloaded absolutely everything before the roast, then picked it up and set it right under her nose. He said, "They did just so happen to have one really nice one in the back. Enjoy yours." When the clerk scanned the meat, she first said, "Oh, I know where I'm coming for dinner," and then added, "Nice, they gave you a discount, lucky you." Hubby just turned and grinned at her, but she didn't grin back. Thank you for watching, I hope you have a beautiful day, and I will see you again tomorrow.